think that a lot of people here, what they're trying to kind of come up with is whether whether the European community or the global community should find a new status quo when it comes to collective security, or maybe they should roll back and try to fix already those missteps that they made when it comes to Crimea not being firm enough in condemnation of the annexation. What do you think? Is it going to be a new status quo and kind of frozen the system as it is right now, or trying to fix it?
Well, first of all, I think Ukraine was smart to say Crimea is a long-term question. And it's my expectation that even if there's a resolution of the situation in eastern Ukraine, I think the West will continue to maintain sanctions on Russia over Crimea. There's some sanctions are related to Crimea, some that are related to eastern Ukraine. And I think the sanctions on Crimea will remain until that situation is resolved to Ukraine's satisfaction. It's hard for me to say what happens in eastern Ukraine. I would like to see Minsk II implemented. I think it's hopeful that in the last 10 days there seems to be a more serious ceasefire. But when you look at the agreement and everything else in it that the Russians have not done, that the separatists have not done, it's hard for me analytically to think there's a good chance that Minsk II will be implemented by the end of the year. And then I think the West is going to have to think through what it does in that case. And I would argue that if the Minsk agreement, which was negotiated and brokered by the Germans and the French, if the Russians and the separatists have caused that agreement not to be implemented, then I would hope that the West would then take steps to try to encourage the Russians to change their policy, and that might entail more sanctions.
A lot of people gossiping about what is behind this recent reduction of violence in eastern Ukraine. So for a lot of people, it's a sign that probably Russia wants to kind of find a way out of sanctions. There is the issue about sanctions that should be taken this December, and also the Syria issue, which is popped out very recently. Do you think that Russia is trying to find another tactic to get out of it, of eastern Ukraine, by saying like, well, we'll help you to fix Syria, for example, and fight ISIS?
Well, if Russia wanted to get out of eastern Ukraine, Russia could get out of eastern Ukraine. I mean, no one's forcing them to stay there. So, I mean, I see so far it seems to be a change in tactics. The Russians have decided for now to ratchet down the violence in eastern Ukraine, and I think that's a good thing. But I'm not sure it means that there's been a change in Russia's overall approach, which I fear remains to still destabilize Ukraine and make it more difficult for the government here in Kyiv to do the sorts of reforms that they're talking about. And so if there really is a genuine change on the Russian policy, I would welcome that. But I don't think we've seen evidence that there's been a major change in the goal. The tactics seem to have changed. And I would also, I would separate the issues of Ukraine and Syria. I don't see a connection between the two. A lot of people will try to draw connections and say that there's some kind of trade-off.
Conspiracy theories are very popular in Eastern Europe.
In the same way that there was a theory, 2 months ago that the United States might sacrifice Ukraine for Iran, which I never believed. I mean, Russia was going to cooperate with the United States and the European Union, China, and Iran, because at the end of the day, Russia does not want to see Iran with nuclear weapons. And so that wasn't a linkage that had to be made.
Russia officially says that they don't want Eastern Ukraine to be part of Russia. They don't want to annex it, as it was the case with Crimea. They want the Eastern Ukraine to remain inside the country. But at the same time, when you travel to Eastern Ukraine, you talk to people along the front line or in rebel-held territories. It's very hard to even see this way for Eastern Ukraine to reintegrate peacefully or without any troubles in coming years or maybe even decades. Do you think that Ukraine is doing enough to communicate with those people who left trapped in rebel-held territories or along the front line?
Well, I think it's probably a situation where the government in Kyiv cannot do too much in terms of trying to communicate to the people in eastern Ukraine that there is a path to reconciliation. There is a path by which they can be reintegrated fully into Ukrainians' political and economic life. And I think that it would be useful for the government to keep hammering that message home and home and home. Because I think there is an opportunity. If Russia says, we don't want eastern Ukraine, that makes it easier, I think, to try to reach out and try to bring those folks back. And I think for the people that are in the occupied parts of Donetsk and Luhansk, I mean, if Russia doesn't want them, it seems to me that they don't want to be they want to be integrated back with Eastern Ukraine, because as a little tiny bit of contested territory, that's not going to offer much of an economic future.
Comparing with just last conference, exactly a year ago, when everything was kind of in an atmosphere of fear, of creeping war, the escalation was happening, and now Ukraine has the first ever 24 hours of complete ceasefire. Do you think that it's a freak accident, or it's a beginning of a new pattern when it comes to security in this part of the region?
But I'm not sure yet we've seen enough to draw a longer-term conclusion about what Russia may or may not want. And again, I still believe that, absent other evidence to the contrary, the Russian goal remains to destabilize the government here. And for now, they've chosen perhaps to ratchet down the military violence. But I'm not sure that means that the Kremlin's objective has changed.